Okay, good evening. This is the CSSU Board of School Directors regular meeting for November 17th, 2015. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Let's see, I have a couple of adjustments to the agenda. We're adding, you should check your agenda. You should have a 7.5 reaffirm committees and committee members. That should be on the agenda, but it was on one copy, not the other. We're adding 7.6, which is a release from contract request. And we're also going to add an executive, well, it's actually on here. So we are going to have an executive session after the common topic tonight. So we're going to cut Megan short a little bit, which I've been told is okay. But it does mean that we need to get her started right at 6 o'clock. Are there any other adjustments to the agenda? Okay, well, if you indulge me for just a minute, I would like to start by acknowledging two losses that we've had for the CSSU community recently. I'm sure you're all aware Barbara Snelling passed away earlier this month. Barbara was not only a local Shelburne school rep, she was the founding chair of the CVU High School District. She was chair of CSSU, and then she went on to even bigger and better things with the president of the State School Directors Association, which sounds like the VSBA preliminary, and a member of the State Board of Ed. And all that was before, or also being Lieutenant Governor and a state senator for Chittenden County. So she was quite an amazing woman. I think we all agree that our community was very much blessed to have her here to do so much for the kids in our district. So she's will be missed. We also lost Jonathan Milne last week. So Jonathan was a 9-year member of the CVU School Board, and he just retired from the school board in March to spend more time with his kids. It was a very short bout with cancer. Devastating, and our hearts go out to Nancy and his girls, Katie and Amanda. Having served with Jonathan for the whole 9 years that he was on the CVU board, I can tell you he was really an outstanding board member. He was always volunteered for the hard stuff. He was clerk, which doesn't sound like that big a deal, but at CVU's clerk has to run the ballot counting. It's a big job beyond the everyday work of the clerk. He was certainly passionate about education, and I'll miss him personally very much. He was a wonderful man, and he was a big loss to the Williston community and the CVU community. So, thank you, and we'll struggle on. So we're on audience and communications. I know what the two gentlemen in the audience are here for, so I'll keep moving. And we'll go on to presentations, 4.1 SU core budget. Mr. Mason.
Thank you. So you have in front of you or in your vicinity the handout of the baseline budget this year, built with the assumptions that you talked about earlier. I'll go through the traditional set of slides that we put together. My presentation is made far easier in that Megan has agreed to pick up the special ed piece in a common topic. So there's a very short number of slides and a couple of things I want to highlight as you begin the budget process. Really nothing has changed in the two circles for the first time in about 8 years. It's the same structure that we had last year. We're in our second year of special education consolidation, it feels like. The first year again, but nonetheless we march on. These are all the numbers that are on your handout, about font size 6 on the thing you have in your hand, a little bigger up here, but it profiles each of the changes as we built the baseline that landed in each of the admin areas of the board, the SU board, executive admin, fiscal services, human resources. A total for core services, we add in special education and student support services to get a total budget for core. The total budget is up 6.8% in large part dollar-wise to the contribution from special education. I'm willing to field any questions you have on that chart. spend a minute or two in each subject area, but it needs very little detail because the top areas are all just reflecting salary and benefit changes that we made to the budget based on assumptions you reviewed earlier in September and October. And then for special education, we incorporated the staff developed service plan that was pulled together with the same group that pulled together the service plan the last year. A little bigger role at the front of the room with Megan than in prior years, but nonetheless done by pretty much the same process. Not very many other significant differences. The remaining budget modifications are in two categories. Those of you who have been part of the process in prior years know that about the third week of December, we get frozen ADM numbers from the state of Vermont to allow us to fix the assessment prorations out to schools. So we'll adjust the third week in December, all the assessments going out to schools by small amounts in every line as we adjust to changes in ADM that we get from year to year. In addition, we're anticipating a list of decision packets. The preponderance of them all will be negative. We're going through kind of an exhaustive process in the central office for each functional area, kind of seeing where we can increase risk just a little bit and delete costs line item by line item. We're also going through what we affectionately describe as special education service planning round 3. What you see in the baselines is what came out of the traditional process. We call that round 1. We've been back around with each of the schools to kind of scrub, search, test whether every bit of contingency and planning that was put in is reasonable and appropriate given the gaps. We plan to do that in some form or fashion one more cycle before we come to you for the December 9th meeting. And these are your two remaining meetings. Your meeting December 9th, we'll review all of that I just described in special ed. You'll walk through the purchase service budgets. We'll do a bit of detail on the decision packet side where we're planning to make reductions. And we'll review assessments out to member schools after being offset for revenue by category. And then finally, you have a late December meeting where you review it all once more, finalize it, and give it pre-approval so we can insert the finished product into each of your local budgets. That's the process. Questions? Yes?
More of a comment than a question. Just as our local boards are facing very tight budgetary pressures to avoid double taxation, it's my hope that the CSSU budget can reflect the pressures that we are experiencing locally, so that if CSSU is passing along a 5.8% budget increase, that's going to make our lives that much more difficult. So it sounds like you all are having the lens on that you're going to be looking for cuts on this baseline. I'm hoping that that's the case.
Yeah, that is recognized and understood. 6.8% isn't going to play well in that landscape, and so we're working hard to get it far lower.
Thank you.
Speaking on behalf of the group. Okay, any other questions? Thanks, everyone.
And everybody has on their agendas tonight to commit to their core services they're participating in? That's correct?
Say that again.
Everybody does have that as an action item on their agendas.
Anybody foresee any problems with that? Any confusion?
I have a question because on the handout it's 5.8 and you said 6.8, which is
Here, there's two different, this is
Oh,
6.8, and the purchase services are,
it's this one. Never mind.
Okay, thank you.
And given that Karen just explained it to Polly, I did neglect to mention, to welcome Karen Macklin onto the CSSU board. She's a new member on this board from the Williston board. She's stepping in for Giovanna, who's not able to participate with us, right?
Right.
So welcome, Karen, and you've already made
Welcome, Karen.
you're already an impact player.
Yeah. Got it.
neither is great.
Okay. 4.2, we've been trying to sneak a little something into the CSSU board agendas on board training. This issue on voting has come up a couple times over the years, and we just thought it would be good to have a common understanding.
Cindy's gonna do that, and she's got a handout.
There was a link in the online agenda that Sandy sent out, but she also sent this out under separate cover via email this afternoon. But here's a hard copy for those of you who would like one. Excuse me, last time we did this, we talked about open meeting law. Now we're shifting on to a little bit about what voting is. It often comes up and it's not covered in this specific article because VSBA hasn't written one, so Elaine and I had to try and find something that best fit. But a reminder that for our practices, it is a majority of the board present. So that often comes up. So if there's only 3 board members on a board, 5 board member, there's only 3 board members present of a 5-member board, 2 to 1 is passing, even though it's not a majority of the board, it's a majority of those present, and 90% of your motions are going to fall under that category. There's some under Robert's rules that require a 2/3 vote, but you don't have those very often, if at all. Robert's rules would say as a member of a public voted and elected official, you have some obligation to have an opinion, and therefore you should vote, so that the community knows where you stand on issues. However, like most things, no one can do anything to you if you don't vote. So you have your duty to vote. If you don't vote, it's called silent acquiescence. So usually where this plays out is on a voice vote. You don't vote nay, you don't vote yay, but you're often going to be reported with the majority vote in such a situation. So often when everything passes with an aye and no one nays, if you really were a nay and you didn't nay, your vote will be counted as voting as a yay. Abstentions, there's sometimes confusion around them, but generally the rule of thumb would be is if you're abstaining because of a conflict of interest, best practice would have you state that conflict of interest at the beginning of the discussion, rather than at the time of the vote, and then you wouldn't participate in the discussion. Excuse me. Generally speaking, though, an abstention, much like silent acquiescence, doesn't change the total. In some situations, it actually changes depending on your rules. If it's a majority of the votes taken, you essentially, it's as if you weren't present at the meeting for that vote. So if it's a 5-member board, 5 people present, you don't vote, it becomes a 2-to-2 vote. The abstention means nothing. It's like you weren't there. So that's the way to think of an abstention. There's some graphics on the back about how that all visually plays out, I guess. But that's generally it. Are there any questions or comments about voting in general?
Well, what I thought was interesting is if you don't vote yes, you don't vote no, you just abstain, then it really counts as a no vote because you need a majority yes to pass the motion. So it's the same as voting no. So people just shouldn't be afraid of it. If you feel that something should not pass, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're violently opposed to it. It just means that you cannot support the motion. So you should go ahead. But again, there are situations, everyone's had personal situations now or then where they feel like they didn't have the information to vote, or they didn't have, they weren't willing to vote, and so they've said no. But I think it's good best practice to try to have an opinion, be prepared to have an opinion.
But under this, Cindy, it looks like if you think you have a conflict, so if you have a family member who's an employee, so you can't vote on the contract, this is saying you need to remove yourself from the room, not just from the discussion.
Yeah, I didn't do a lot of research into where this came from, but that under Robert's rules, the big rules, that they actually say yes, you should leave the room. Under a small group, which we traditionally operate under, I think people have been fine with people staying at the table just as long as they're not participating. But you're supposed to make it clear up front before the discussion occurs that you've got the conflict, so people are aware.
If people are abstaining and they, do they have participation in the conversation then, if they know they're abstaining?
That's what she's.
I mean, if you operate under the theory that an abstention means that you've got some kind of conflict, which is why you're choosing not to vote, then yeah, you shouldn't be
Is there a difference
participating in the
between
conversation
abstaining and
either. I'm sorry?
recusing? Isn't that recusing different than abstaining? I mean,
I mean, some would say it's the same result. I mean, if you're abstaining, for example, because you just feel like you don't have enough information to make a vote, obviously you achieve that through participating, and I don't know if that's necessarily why you should abstain. It's just, you know, it does say if there's insufficient information, and maybe that's what you declare when you abstain. I think I will be abstaining from this vote because technically that should come before the vote even occurs, but
So
because you're not, the board chair is actually not supposed to ask for abstentions. They're supposed to ask for yes and no votes.
Right, and I would say that an abstention is a personal decision that you're making,
Yeah.
whereas a recusal is a personal responsibility
True.
that you have. Right, if you're recusing yourself, there is no time when you should be saying, maybe I will vote on this. Whereas an abstention, you're making a decision about whether or not you want to make public your opinion for whatever reason, whether it's lack of information or whatever it is.
And if you're feeling there's a lack of information, probably you're not the only one, depending on the situation. I mean, there's some things, if you're a newer board member that hasn't been there for the 2 years worth of conversation, you might be a little different, but, I mean, obviously we want to make sure everyone has as much information as possible, especially in a really big vote where they felt like they absolutely could not vote because they didn't have the information. We should be trying to address that.
and I always get a little caught up because I think when someone abstains without recusing, I'm curious and I like to know. I don't really know there's room in Robert's rules for me to ask people, so sometimes we do it anyway, just to understand why.
I have a question. Is there any role for other board members to ask another board member to recuse him or herself when other people see a conflict of interest, but that board member may?
There is, under the board conflict of interest policy, I couldn't tell you which one, it's in section A or B, I think.
Oh, it must be B.
There is a process for, you know, calling someone out, but complaining that someone may have a conflict of interest. But I haven't run into that in 13 years here. Everybody's always been pretty upfront about whether they have a professional or personal tie to some decision the board's making.
I've run into that
I mean, I think if you saw it on the agenda, giving your board chair a heads up ahead of time so that they could have the conversation with the person in advance of the meeting would probably be the best way to handle it.
Mhm.
Rather than right here, right now.
Right. Don't you keep.
Colleen?
Sorry.
Part of me hates to bring it up, but I will. So years ago, when we were in the process of having conversations related to negotiations, we used to have board members recuse themselves from the room if they had a family member who was in an association, not just CSSU. And it's just something that we should maybe think about, get other advice from others and so forth, because negotiations do tend to have a statewide influence. And, you know, a lot of us have family members, so it might mean that half of our board members would leave, so there's the other piece. But I think it's worth just having some clarity about what our agreed upon role is or responsibility with that. And I'm not advocating a position, I'm just saying it used to be practice.
Yeah,
and-
no.
We can look that up.
So
that
maybe
we-
for the February training, we can do conflict of interest. Kind of ties nicely with
That's
this.
true, but this one is tricky because I know I'm married to a teacher, which is why I'm not on the
You know.
board, but there are a lot of people who also have kids who are teachers, that's right, and so it becomes when your immediate family has, you know, it's a small community, we don't.
Small state.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's that line between, so I'm not disagreeing with you, Cindy, maybe we do something on that, but I also think that might warrant, before we get into our next negotiations, having that conversation. To some degree, I also think, as long as you're very upfront about the fact that, you know, you have a family member that's, you know,
Well, we
we're all
should
adults,
just have
but-
clarity and you know,
Yep.
agreement about it.
or we work in education, that's another thing, right?
Well,
Right, where do you
well,
outline?
Let's limit it to P12.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Okay, reports to the board, Colt report?
Yeah, so you all have in your own reports the NESDEC enrollments. I thought it was pretty interesting, and I apologize for not having made copies of this as I was running out the door, but I kind of did a chart that has, what were the actuals in 2005, the projections from 2007 to 2013. I really wanted to do 2005 to 15, but Sandy and I couldn't find them. The actuals in 2015, and then the projections for 2025. Because if you look at your own projections, and I'm just going to tell you actual and projected in each of the schools from 2015 to 2025, and I'll send this to you tomorrow, but I think it's interesting to think about, like, especially as we're in the throes of having conversations around the study committee for merger, where these numbers seem to be going, which is why I wanted to take a look back and see how accurate have they been in the past? You know, are we in the ballpark or not? So the actual for 2015, starting with Charlotte, is 381, and the projected in 10 years is 410. So not a big swing, but you're not continuing to go down. Heinsberg, their actual is 521, projected 519. You know, and you look at Heinsberg's numbers, they are even the whole way. Shelburne, actual 778, projected 837. Williston, actual 2015, 1046, projected 2025. And as far as I can tell, the St. George numbers are in there. CVU, actual 1226 and projected 1155, which, you know, if anybody's a math whiz, you would have gotten to that just by listening to all of the other projections that they'd be down a bit. But so we're going down, you know, and that has an impact on our per pupil allotment and all of that.
Can you say the Williston numbers?
So,
You just didn't say the numbers out loud.
oh, I'm
1046
sorry,
going.
1046 to 950.
Oh,
What did I say?
You just did. You said
I'm
2025.
sorry.
But
you
you're
said
gonna send this to
2025,
us.
and I thought.
Oh, no, 950.
That's development at Top Corner.
I'm really sorry, yeah. Yeah,
So what is it?
950,
Okay. That makes more sense.
yeah.
So you'll send us that summary.
I will send you this. You could do the same thing.
It's in
Well, you
here,
wouldn't be
right?
able to do the whole same thing. You have to take the 5 years back or 7 years back to get the early numbers, but.
Thank you for doing that for us.
Yeah, no, I was curious myself about it when I saw the first two numbers.
And you said, I'm sorry, that it didn't, the Williston numbers did include St. George?
Yeah, yeah. So Megan, maybe you want to, Megan did a lot of work in this month's Colt report on CY and just everything that it encompasses, and maybe you would just do a couple highlights.
Sure. So the board asked to sort of have a sense of what does CY provide in your schools and what of those services are required either through EQS or other legislation. So I'm happy to highlight things or just answer questions, but the pieces that are highlighted in Ed Quality, that mostly hits your SAP counselor, so your SAP services in the schools. SAPs are one of the providers that are counted in the array of people that EQS considers part of your guidance and counseling system. So there's information in there about that. There's some information about the mentoring program and other pieces. So happy to jump into something in particular.
On the the table for student assistant program data.
Yep.
For the curricula hours delivered, it just jumped out at me. I mean, Charlotte has 122.
So
Is that right? What's going on in Charlotte?
So part of it has to do with the reality that all of you have a slightly different model of how you deliver all the different components of school counseling. So for some schools, they rely heavily on their SAP to provide curriculum, and other schools rely on other educators to provide the curriculum component, and SAPs provide more of the intervention, the assessment part of your prevention framework. Charlotte, with your addition this year of the health educator, that is part of what shifted the service delivery model. So SAP and Charlotte primarily in the past had a lot of curriculum involvement, less so now because of the shift in service delivery. And that's just one example of how that varies in other schools as well. Thank you.
Any other questions? You were,
Jeff,
Yeah,
can you,
sure. We have 2 in-service days coming up next Monday and Tuesday, where all the K-8s will be focusing on developing proficiency-based summative and formative assessments, or some will be working on NGSS science units, building those. And it'll also be split with all the local work that is going on in each building. And we also have a number of folks both attending and presenting at the Vermont Standards-Based Learning Symposium this week, where the guest speaker is Carol Ann Tomlinson, the differentiated instruction expert. And I think it's a real testament that we have so many people actually who have been asked to present, that we have so many resident experts.
What grade levels are they presenting?
Middle through high school.
anybody else, please? Do you want Bob to speak, or?
no, unless you've got a question.
On the board chairs, you were going to mention something that's coming up in our actions later?
Oh, yeah, I've got it right there. So you might have noticed that I'm hobbling around a little bit. And the end result of that will be that I'll be having surgery in January. And at board chairs meeting, it was recommended that I make a recommendation for a replacement during my part, somebody to be acting superintendent. So I will be doing that during the action items. Any questions about that?
Just to put it in context, the board chairs really felt that we felt more comfortable if there was an appointed, someone we could call without saying, should we call Elaine? No, it's too soon. So we just needed to, we felt more comfortable having a go-to person, so.
Yeah, and I can tell you right now, I will be out for 1 month for sure. So that,
In January.
in January, the whole month of January, for sure.
Okay, so we'll circle that back around to that one. I just wanted the context. Any other questions on the Colt report? Quiet bunch tonight. 5.2, first quarter FMR. Bob?
It's in your packet. As we finish the first quarter, we're a little bit challenged with special ed, you'll see in the report. Services at the moment, particularly professional services and outside tuition, are significantly above the service plan we developed a year ago. So we've included our best estimate of those additional costs. In all honesty, all Megan and I have worked on is nailing down the expenditures at this point in time. At some point in the next 2 or 3 months, we'll back through the revenue side, do a little work with the AOE to understand the offsetting revenue that's directly tied to the additional expenditures. That revenue is not included in anything you see here today.
That was my question.
So react to, with a degree of concern to the 182,000, but then temper it a bit based on additional work that she and I are doing.
Any questions on the FMR? Okay, cruising now. 5.3, Act 46 Committee Report. Colleen?
So in your packet, you had a summary report that was sent to you last week, and it's on page 42 of the full packet. And since that was sent out, there have been probably at least 3 meetings. So this is an update to that report. And we can make sure that what I'm sharing now gets in some print format so that you can see it. But just, a few pieces to know. Since September 28th, we've had 6 full study committee meetings And as you know from the summary in the packet, we've broken some of our tasks out by having subcommittees meeting, and we've got 3: communications, governance, financials. So in addition to the 6 full study committee meetings, we've had at least 7 subcommittee meetings. So this group has been very active and taking this set of tasks very seriously. So last night we had another meeting and we started drafting, well, what are our shared values, guiding principles, and for example, using policy to ensure equitable opportunity, efficient use of resources, and flexibility for local initiatives. So that seems to be one core value that everyone agrees upon. Of course, offer programs that provide value to the community at a cost that communities are willing to support, promote transparency in systems that are understandable and allow for public accountability. We need to do all this work through clarifying roles and responsibilities that allow for high educational standards based on state and CSSU standards, and that allow for local input into local issues. We're hearing that there might be something particular to a community, so you want to allow for responsiveness to what's going on there. And to help with operations, enhance board training, because policy will be a big driver in how a consolidated board would function. So, some of the things that people have been wondering about, well, what does it look like? You've heard advisory and necessary. We're saying the 4 districts that have operating schools, so Williston, Shelburne, Charlotte, Heinsberg, St. George, there's agreement would be advisory. We want St. George, we love St. George, but we can go forward without them. But we want them. They've got almost 100 kids in the system. And Kelly has promised to put a toll booth in if we don't. Grades of operation, of course, pre-K-12, assets liability, there's agreement that it just all goes into one pot. I'm sure there's going to be discussion about that so that people understand what that means. Board size, the range was 12 to 18. It was coming back to 12 last night. That would be 2 Charlotte, 2 Heinsberg, 3 Shelburne, 4 Williston, 1 St. George, if it was a 12-member board. Other issues for articles of merger, association contracts, of course, we honor them. Something to consider is that next year we are in a process with the Teachers Association that we would be, the fall would be the start point for a new round of contract negotiations. And school configurations, student mobility, student placement issues. We want to provide some opportunity for people to have an understanding of what that means for them as individuals, but don't want to bind don't want to set the parameters so strict that nothing can happen. We're going to be meeting on December 8th, so if you want to key into that particular meeting through the Google Hangout, you can just be at home and pop in online and observe the discussion. That's going to be one of the topics of conversation is discussing the lexicon of what it means for student mobility, placement, what we do now, and so forth. Another topic are mechanisms for local input on policy and budget. This has been a big topic for everybody. We want to ensure that there's public engagement opportunity. And so we, just doing brainstorming lists of ensuring that there are annual surveys, budget meetings in each district, use of budget buddies, robust web presence that may be more interactive, wording policies, allowing for local discussion, presentations within individual communities on topics, and so forth. We still are in the process of identifying transition issues. You may recall that for the first year of operation, there would be 2 sets of boards working side by side, a consolidated board and the existing boards. So how does that work? What does that look like? And that's just boards, let alone the operations, I think with special education, that being a leader with our consolidation issues, we're learning a lot from their process, and we'll be drawing on what Megan's learning from that to inform how we have discussions about what would happen elsewhere. So next meetings, we've had 2 public forums so far, low attendance, but it's good because we're starting to practice our discussion and we're getting new questions, our FAQs. We have a website, but let's see, December 8th is the next full study committee meeting, and we'll probably have a few subcommittee meetings prior to them so that we'll go to the meeting with something to really work on. The local board input, January 19th. It's not on the regular schedule for board meetings. We typically don't have a meeting in January because you're doing all of the budget meetings, but we really need to have a focused time, so board chairs agreed to have that January 19th meeting, and that will be an opportunity. You'll have the report ahead of time.
Just clarification, the board chairs agreed to put it on the agenda so that each board can, and it's a
We've had so many
recommendation.
meetings, I was thinking
I
maybe
know.
we did that past
I just want to make
October.
sure that people know that we're not.
Tonight
Yeah.
we're asking
It's
for
on
it.
the agendas tonight for each of the local boards.
So hopefully local boards will agree. So I'll stop there. So, but I just clarified that there's going to be a draft report. Local boards have an opportunity to respond to the local report. We take commentary from it, listen, get our identifying questions that we need to work out a little bit more, and then the study committee would meet again, do whatever revisions based on comments, and then hopefully get a draft report to the Agency of Education to review in the beginning of February, first week in February. So that's our very aggressive timeline. An awful lot of work has happened. Our administrators and staff have been incredibly supportive of the process and helping us get the information and move things along, and very appreciative to all the hard work that's gone into it.
So,
Questions?
in the interest of time, everybody has this on their local agenda, right? So maybe you could catch Colleen if you need some clarification before you go to your local board, but that's where the discussion would be great to include all the board members in those discussions. And there's somebody at all the boards who've been at all our meetings, right? So they should have some.
And I sent, this summary that I just went through, I sent that late this morning to the study committee, but it will go to everybody at some point. It just wasn't ready.
So just keep in mind when you are at the local boards is that this is the time to pay attention and weigh in if you're not on the study committee, because the writing has to begin. And we have to start drafting something, and just a reminder, we don't have an option about writing a report. We have to write the report. So, now's the time to jump in, because the next time this board will see it will be in January. So.
Just to be clear, so it's not on CVU's agenda?
No, it is not.
That's why your
Right.
first 20 minutes, you're going to go to your local board.
You're going to go to Charlotte.
Yeah, not all the way to Charlotte.
To Charlotte, next door.
In our
They moved it.
our communications subcommittee, and, Kevin helping us with I'm giving you kudos. So, the public website for our Act 46 study committee, Kevin's done a good job of getting us up and going, and what we're going to start doing is making sure that from the CSSU website that it's going to jump there. We haven't quite been ready to make that, but take a look at it. You can find everything.
And finally, I really have to thank Colleen. She's been living and breathing this for 8 weeks now and doing the yeoman's work on it. So thank you, Colleen. Let's
go.
She wants to get her life back.
No,
Thank you. You're
it's-
doing a lot of work on our behalf, so we appreciate that.
The whole study committee's been doing incredible work. Everyone's taken on a piece of it. Thank you.
Okay. We're on to discussion matters, 6.1 policy. Cindy, anything besides me asking for questions? Is there anything else you'd like to?
No, they're pretty standard presentation this time. Any questions, concerns?
Actually, my only question, I guess, was on the F-32, restrictive behavioral intervention. Could you just tell me how the procedures get reviewed? It does say the superintendent shall report annually to the board, but I'm not sure I've seen that
remembered that, right?
recently.
I'll rely on my sidekick here, but they are largely prescribed by the Agency of Education. We really don't get to
Yeah.
write our own procedures in this area.
Yeah, it's really prescriptive to the point where there's a required form that needs to be filled out to document any incident of seclusion and restraint, pretty structured training. So it is pretty well spelled out for us. I mean, I think Elaine wrote a note and I did as well around the update to the board, around, about that information, but, yeah, very prescriptive, and it's the model policy from the AOE. So not a lot of leeway.
So I don't know, does the model policy say that she has to report to us annually? Because if not, maybe,
The model policy.
maybe that,
I'm gonna put that on board chair's agenda, because that would be a good conversation to see what is it that the board would want to know? Like how many incidents were reported, you know what I mean? What's the data that would be helpful?
And tonight, we're looking for input for the policy committee anyway, so we can certainly discuss that when we meet as well.
any other comments or questions on policy? Get another shot at this at your local boards? Oh, I'm sorry,
Job
Josh.
sharing policy is in existence, there's just no changes, or is this new language?
It's in existence and we have no changes to propose.
Okay. We are on to 7.0 action matters, 7.1 legislative breakfast. Can I have a motion to set the legislative breakfast for Monday, January 25th? So moved. Thanks, Kathy.
Second.
Any discussion around that? Okay, so that's the day we're gonna pencil in. It may change, but that's what we're gonna go forward with for now. Could you repeat that again? January 25th, the last Monday in January. Vote on that? Did we just vote? I'm having a brain cramp. Do we vote?
No,
or
we
I
haven't
just say-
voted yet.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm not allowed to ask if you're abstaining because it's your birthday or something. Go ahead and abstain, Kevin. Abstain from that date.
Is it your birthday?
No.
It's your birthday.
We'll bring back
I
cake.
should abstain because it's not my birthday.
7.2, can I have a motion to appoint the acting superintendent? All right, we should have a recommendation.
My recommendation is that Megan Roy serve as acting superintendent during my recovery.
So can I have a motion to appoint Megan Roy as acting superintendent during Elaine's recovery?
So moved.
Second.
Get that, Sandy?
It was Colleen. I don't want.
You can do it.
Pick any one.
Yeah, you do.
I'm going to ask if there's any discussion. If there is discussion, we, of a particular nature, we go into executive session on this, but if there's no discussion, we can, any discussion?
I want you to take as much time off as you can and to rest as much as possible and to not worry about the SU while you're gone.
I feel like it will be in very good hands all around.
Let's have
Thank you.
have an old school recovery where you
Thank you.
do your email every 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I wish
take
that for you.
2-3
Yes.
weeks even.
I think many of us want to echo that.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
You will be
Okay.
missed, but we want you to have the full recovery.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Megan doesn't get to abstain because she's not voting. You know what, 7.3, now that I look at it, I don't think this board should be voting on
Yeah,
that,
no,
right?
it's really the local boards that should vote on that.
So I'm just gonna ask for a motion, nobody say anything, and then we'll just move on and not vote on it, okay? I have a motion to schedule a January 19th board meeting. Hearing none.
That was slick,
That's good.
Well, you
Gina.
could table
Robert
it and
is
then it has
looking
to
at
come
you.
out.
No, then
But
we'd
we
have to
might.
bring
No,
it
then we
back
have to
next
come
time.
bring it back in.
It's
if we
not
table it.
appropriate. I
It's
should
not
have
an
struck
SU
it.
board.
But everyone should know this is an all-board meeting, and it's very important, so make sure it's on your calendar, but it's not an SU board meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the leave of absence request for Therese, I don't know, I can't say her last name.
Schroeder.
Thank you.
So
Have a
moved.
motion? Thank you, Kevin. Second? Is that Kathy? Second. Second, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Ayes have it. 7.5, can I have a motion to reaffirm the committee and committee members? So moved. Thank you, Kristen. Do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kelly. I handed this out, I'm sorry it was late. This really is the same as what we discussed and approved in September last year. With basically only updated the appointments since then, and a couple of dates. I said, have this done by the date that's already passed, and they're underlined. But other than that, they're the same. Just a reminder, we have a committee on legislative breakfast. We have the superintendent's evaluation committee. We have an administrative compensation committee. Policy committee, of course.
And I'm on there, but should not be.
You should not be.
Our rep is Clyde Baldwin.
On policy?
Mhm.
Thank you for the update. See, I'm going really fast, and nobody has a chance to say, take me off that committee. Number 5.
That's just the, Mount Windsor.
On policy?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I see. Not TBD. This is the SU Strategic Planning Committee. We did put it in place in September of last year, but that's dissolved in place of we put the Act 46 Study Committee in place. We have a committee focused on leadership. You can read the charge there. We had a communications committee that met one time, and then we decided we were done. Very efficient committee. And then we do have the outcomes and indicators where it's really inactive pending some restructuring around that topic. So these are the committees that we have in place as a board, and I was negligent in not doing something to get them recommitted in September, so I just wanted to catch it up. So is there any questions or other corrections besides the two names on the policy committee? Okay. So in that case, all in favor of reaffirming the committees and committee members, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. And 7.6, can I have a motion to approve the release from contract for John Straza? So moved. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kristen. Any discussion around this?
I have a question or two, and maybe that would be more appropriate in executive session.
I guess it depends on the
Ask it, and then I'll
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah. Yes.
I would like to know whether the Charlotte Central School Board is unanimously in approval of this. And if they're not,
We
then.
just got this today.
Got it today. Because this seems to be impacting them in a significant way or potentially.
I mean,
Megan?
what I would say is that it's true that this will have an impact, significant impact. I think the reality of it is this person is leaving in December, so one way or the other, I think, there's still conversation to be had in executive session. I'm happy to stay for that part of it. We're almost as new to the information as you and the Charlotte board are. But the reality is the person's leaving the state in December, so.
I just want to be deferential to the Charlotte School
Well,
Board under the circumstances.
so my questions, now it looks like it's new information, but my questions were, is there someone in line to replace or someone we're thinking about? This is pretty quick. This is December 17th. I know it's over the holiday. If there's a plan for that.
So it's very quick, and I would be remiss if I said that it was easy to fill that in that time frame. But we do, we anticipate posting the position tomorrow, pending this conversation, and have some promising leads for that, and also a couple of different contingency plans should those leads not happen, or should those leads not pan out.
And Megan assured us that she will just step in. Be an interim superintendent.
In January.
It's actually the real reason Elaine's taking time off.
But that is the interesting, situation we're in, where it's the SU
Right.
board that decides, but it has more of an
Right.
impact on one school. But
Right, and to your point, Josh, had this been a typical or something we had more lead time, that informal process that we put in place where the local board they can't act on it, but they'd at least be able to engage in the conversation, would have preceded it coming to the SU board for a decision. This is just a situation where if we're gonna do anything to fill the position, so it would not, if this were an announced resignation for the following school year, it would not have come flipped like this, which doesn't help, but it's where we are.
So, just another question. So if, it's not even, it seems to me it's not even to our benefit to deny the motion because we can't post the position if we don't
Right.
let them out of the contract, right?
Well, I think
We
that
can, we can post an anticipated opening anytime we want. And to Megan's point, he won't be
leaving.
here, so we have an opening. We
Right.
just like the board to
But-
act before we.
So the contract's unenforceable in a sense.
You would spend more money trying, they're never gonna give you specific performance, they're never gonna order him to fulfill his term. You may get some damages, but whether the board wants to engage in that or not.
So Cindy, there's nothing prospective in our contract with our employees that provides for any, clawback or any disincentive for them to walk
There
away?
is no specific damage clause in the current.
So if a person were leaving us high and dry and they were planning to stay in the state, we could call the AOE and have their license pulled for a year. That's the recourse that we have. But since that's not the situation, there is very little we can do.
So, I know this person was at UVM studying. Did we pay for any of that?
No. No. Not
Nope. And you understand why?
Yes, yeah.
Any other questions? We're ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Kristen. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mark. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Confirm next meeting date, December 9th, budget meeting at 5:30.
That's the CSSU board.
It is? Okay. Yeah, I was
We're
gonna
meeting
say,
here.
so it's at CVU.
You asked for
Yeah.
that last month, and we
Yeah,
aim to
excellent.
oblige.
Nice. Including not the people who live in Shelburne, but the rest of us.
I don't remember us actually voting on that. I thought somebody mentioned that, and it was not
Must
said
have been
that
the
it
right
happened.
person to mentioning it. Okay, and the budget meeting's there, next, of course, the January 19th all-board meeting is mentioned here, if it goes through and locally. And just a reminder that after the common topic, we're going to go into executive session with all the board members who are present, so, but that'll be after the common topic, okay? All boards. All right. Megan, you're up.
All right.
I believe, right?
Yes,
Of course.
she is.
So, all right, while I get my PowerPoint coming up, I'm sorry I didn't have this for you in advance, but I'm passing out a copy of it.
Thank you.
just want to show you something I learned.
Oh, thank you.
Here's the base question. I want one of these.
Shave.
No, I know, but I might give you somebody that would help you out instead.
Anytime you want to do it, it's fine. We're a fun group.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, the Act 46 committee has become a
Yeah.
Makes negotiations look easy.
Great. That's another thing we'll like to hear. So there you go.
Really likes me.
That's gonna be my recruiting slogan. Fewer meetings in the athletics committee.
Start. Maybe have, I'll do what I
So
can.
get up
We
and
have,
back
maybe
is
have
going.
board chairs, maybe fill out the rest. We'll just have a snapshot.
Hey, Megan, if there are any budget buddies in the audience, can you please give them a copy of this, please?
Yes, I don't have
We don't have enough.
copies that went around, so we can get that to you eventually, but maybe distribute it to you.
Do you want to share?
Okay, so we'll share something.
Yes, we did not factor in budget money.
Megan.
Is there some, I can go make copies.
Here. Pass that towards the crowd.
Yeah.
And we can send it out to all budget buddies tomorrow morning.
She's been with us like the last 5 years.
One more?
It should be for everybody, right? Everybody's invited to this. There should be copies for everybody that's sitting over
We
there.
usually don't have any people.
Yeah, I've never.
I don't know what happened to Patrice couldn't make it, but of course you did. Well, she's
It's that kind of weather, isn't it?
Okay, let's keep going, because we're gonna have to cut Megan off early, so jump right in.
There will be ample time for you to ask questions at the end, but also feel free to stop if there's a question that you feel like needs to be answered so that you have context moving forward. What I'm hoping to do tonight is first walk you through a little bit, without belaboring it, but a little bit about special ed and what we're obligated to provide, so that and a little bit about how decisions are made in special education, so you have some background and context. We will go through the process and the timeline of coming back to last spring and talking about how the special ed budget is developed, and also what's been different about this year's budget process. Then we will look at the actual the budget itself and the work that's been done since the service plan, and talk about next steps. And again, we should have time for questions. So just in general, without reading this slide verbatim, special education is a legal obligation. We don't have a choice to provide special ed. These are entitlement services, which means that it's federal law. Students who are eligible for special education are entitled to a free, appropriate public education, and any services and supports that they need in order to receive a FAPE, we are required to provide. There's a lot of information about what FAPE means. It is driven by an individualized education program or plan, which is developed by a team with required members. There are a lot of procedural safeguards around this, but suffice it to say, we are obligated to provide FAPE. That doesn't necessarily mean we're obligated to provide everything that a student might benefit from. We're required to provide what they need in order to access their education. At the IEP level, many people ask whether or not cost can be a factor in IEP decisions. The true answer is no, in the sense that if a student needs a set of services, you can't say, I'm sorry, that's too expensive of a set of services. You need to provide it. If, however, you can provide what that student needs differently, or if you're looking at two identical sets of services and one is cheaper, you can use the cheaper model. So as we go through this, I'm going to talk a little bit about how decision making works and how you navigate that conversation, because it's very challenging. I'm also going to talk a little bit about confidentiality. You hear this every year, but I'm going to kind of reiterate. We are required to not disclose personally identifiable information. And in special education, in a small community, such as we have, especially some of our smaller ones, when we get down to the level of talking about specific services, we may inadvertently be identifying the student who receives those services. So there are times when your N is really small that we may not be able to get to the level of detail that the board may like. And that's why. We generally don't have issue with this. Generally speaking, I think you get the information that you need from this process, but just know that if you're drilling down to, well, how come what was this particular outside placement cost? If we were to disclose maybe where that was from, what town, people may be able to identify who that student is. Questions about confidentiality? LEA authority. So there is decision-making involved at the IEP development stage, and it is the point at which we are agreeing to disseminate resources. So there is real-time control of costs in decision-making because there is always an LEA representative at an IEP meeting. In our system, those folks are our building-based special ed administrators, primarily. And so this is actually by law, every IEP meeting needs to have a representative. They need to meet this criteria, which means they're knowledgeable about both general and special education, but also that they're knowledgeable about and can authorize decisions to expend the resources of the LEA. So that's a pretty key piece of this. It means that when decisions are made, there is someone there who has an awareness of the budget and our ability to spend money. It can be a designee as long as the designee meets all of those requirements. In a sense, the building-based special ed administrators are the designees. In our system, here are our building-based special ed administrators. Carter is here for Williston, and so we have Dawn in Shelburne, Anna at CBU, Laura at Heinsberg, and right now John in Charlotte. Okay. The other information that guides services that we write into an IEP is whether or not they are working. So that would be looking at student outcomes. This is not a black and white method of looking at whether or not what we're doing is worthwhile. We are required to measure students' progress toward their IEP goals. We look at our common assessment data and our statewide data to ascertain from a systems level, is what we're doing working? And there are lots of other ways that we measure this. It does not necessarily mean that if a student's not achieving their goals, then the amount of money we're spending is or isn't correct. This is more to let you be aware that we do look at this. In fact, for us as educators, this is the most important part of monitoring our piece. We also look very heavily in CSSU, especially in the past 2 years of developing a consolidated budget. We look at comparative data. How do our services compare across the district? You'll remember in our journey towards special ed consolidation, we use a standards of practice approach, meaning we identify what are the guiding principles, that a set of, this is what we know works in intervention. The exact model each of our schools use can vary as long as it's in alignment with those guiding principles. But we also need to couple that with actual data about how do we deliver services and are they equitable across the system. We look at a lot of different metrics, but we tend to spend a lot of time on special ed density, how many both professionals and paraprofessionals do we have compared to the number of students we have. We do look at disability category trends, and we're looking for patterns, we're looking for discrepancies. And this piece I pulled out on the bottom is something that Nicole Mace said in a presentation earlier this fall. In general, in education, we might have fewer students, but they come to us with more complex needs. And that's very relevant in a special ed budget. So that's kind of the context around special education. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we build the special ed budget. So the process starts in the spring of the year before. So this past May and June.
Hey Megan, I'm sorry to just interrupt you. So kids, tell me if this is right or wrong or just comment on it. The kids have to fail into special ed.
A really good question. No, but and I say no in the sense that when we know very early on that students have a disability, so there's 3 parts of eligibility. Do they have a disability? is that disability adversely affecting their education? And do they need specialized instruction? Those are the 3 gates. That middle gate, in order to meet adverse effect, that student has to perform in the bottom 15th percentile of their class. So in a sense, you could say that that means they have to fail, but in a multi-tiered system of support, prior to getting to the special ed question, you're providing supports along the way. So maybe 10 years ago, when we didn't have that system of supports, we were sort of waiting until the student wasn't performing. But right now, we're identifying them early, we're providing intervention, and we're measuring. We only get to a special ed evaluation now if they're not responding to the intervention we're providing.
So those first couple steps, though, aren't special ed.
They're not special education, they're all general education. That's right.
So is the opposite true, Megan, if they get support and they're above that threshold, then do they come off the IEP?
Yes, you can evaluate a student off an IEP, and that's our hope and our goal. There are some students, based on their disability, that will always need a certain amount of supports, but others, it really is about finding that infusion of intervention that raises them up. So yes, it does happen.
Is the determination of whether or not a student is on or considered a special ed student made within the school system, or is it outside resources as well?
By and large, inside resources. So our school psychologists, our special educators, our OTs, PTs, occasionally for certain disabilities, if we need a medical professional to make a diagnosis, then we would consider outside information. But it's the evaluation planning team who ultimately makes the decision is made up of school-based staff. Okay. Whoops. Finished talking about this. So in May, June, it starts at an IEP level. So using software that Mike Nadeau developed and is still helping us use, allowing us to use, and case managers sit down and they compile the services and supports that the students on their current caseload need. So that is the direct connection between a student's IEP and the services that ultimately get built into the budget. They start that process in the spring. Over the summer, the building-based special ed administrators take their first look at that information that their special educators built. So they're looking at it for basic accuracy. They are anticipating students that might be transitioning in to our system from birth to 3 or out of the system, the other side. They look at school-wide services like OT, PT, and psych services, and they look at their general budget lines. So they do sort of their first review of the budget. In the fall, I meet individually with each building-based administrator to review their plan. We have conversations about increases, decreases, things they're anticipating, service delivery model changes that they're contemplating. This is the point at which I now have comparative data across the SU. We look at that, we look at trends, we look at what we spent in the previous year. The operations team, so Bob, Cindy, and Miranda, and I review staffing. The single budget gets pulled together. In early October, we meet, so the operations team meets with each school's principal and special ed director. So we have a series of service planning meetings where we go in detail through their staffing and their service plan information. We have to make our final changes to the service plan because it needs to be at the Agency of Ed by October 15th. And then the service plan forms the baseline of the special ed budget. In prior years, typically this is where the process ended. That would be the baseline budget that you all saw. This year, for the first time, we've had a second round of service plan meetings and a lot more closely scrutinizing the budget. So the budget percentage increase this year is higher than it has been in many, for at least the time that I've been here. And with or without the allowable growth percentages, we would be coming back around to that percent increase to investigate what that is. And as you can imagine, this is a very tricky process to come back to because we have to balance the fact that these are entitled services that we need to provide with the idea that are there areas that we can impact relative to that percent increase? Are there ways that we can provide them more efficiently? Can we talk about the amount of risk we're willing to take on? So that's really been the focus of our work for the past 2 or 3 weeks. And there are 3 ways that we've looked at this budget the second time around. The first one is just kind of, has anything changed since the beginning of the year? Generally, there's not a lot of swing that happens when looking at it that way, but for example, we've had a couple of students move out, so we would adjust those numbers. We'll jump down to C. We also have a conversation about, are there service delivery models that we can look at that would be more efficient and therefore less cost? Are there ways that we can do what we're already doing more efficiently? And B is to really look closely at risk management. So in our conversations, what we're proposing on the next slide, which I'll get to in a second, is a special ed budget that does not have a lot of contingency built in. And so that's something that the board really needs to be aware of and contemplate as we move through this process. You saw, or you heard from Bob today about where we are right now in our special ed FMR for the 15-16 school year. That's pretty good evidence as to how special education can fluctuate from year to year. When 3 students move in September and 2 of them have a very costly outplaced plan, there's not a lot of flexibility, especially quickly, that we have to be able to change that. So as we get to the end of this presentation, you'll have to realize that the budget that we are proposing bringing to you, a more efficient budget, also takes on a lot more risk. Okay? Yep. Sorry.
So, does the state, did they say, wait, it's way too high or it's out of line as it's been in the past? Does the state ever say that, or did we say it's way out of line and we need to make it lower,
Right.
or we need to change it?
I would say we do more than the state. The state does send back a list of questions, and they look at your percentage increase, and they essentially say, your percentage increase is X. Can you confirm that that's accurate, and can you explain why that is? But they really don't. The state special ed part of the process does not give you any pressure to decrease that. They don't flag.
Megan, doesn't the state identify high spenders, though?
Yes.
Not that we've ever been on the
Yes.
list and know that process quite well, but the state does look at comparable spending rates for the same size pool of children and
Yes.
says you're statistically over on the far side of norm.
Yes, and if you are identified as a high-spending special education school, you are usually flagged to be audited far more often than your colleagues. We have not been audited in a while, not since I've been here, and possibly, yeah, it's been a long time since we've been audited. So we're not identified as a high spender.
Yeah, and I think that people might want to know that we're always in the middle of the pack.
Yes.
We've never been identified as a high spender for,
Yep.
I don't know how many years, but at least 10.
And just so I understand, connecting the spending to categories, so children eligible for special education, the good news is that they can get it if they're categorized. The bad news is they get categorized. So I think where I'm hearing you going is that if we can make it the system suitable for more children and not have them categorized as eligible for special ed, the whole boat might rise.
Well, it would be great if our statewide funding system could catch up with what we know about multi-tier systems of support, because to a certain extent, what we haven't talked about yet is reimbursement. Special ed eligible expenses are reimbursable. Only special ed eligible expenses are reimbursable. So to achieve kind of what you're talking about, yes, it would be great to have non-categorical funding, because then we could use our staff flexibly to serve kids and prevent them from being eligible for special education. We're not in a place anymore where you don't get service unless you're eligible. And I think special ed for a while was the only way you could get service. We're not there. But what it means is we don't get reimbursed for services that we're doing in the name of prevention. There is always conversation at the legislature about that. There's a lot of advocacy on the part of BCSEA, which is our professional organization, to push that funding question. But we still live in the funding reality where you need to be identified to get reimbursement. Okay, so that's the process so far. And the other piece that I would just highlight is we are still in process. This is still a moving target. What we're showing you tonight is where we are as of this moment, and we're still having conversations.
We're looking at baseline or a second pass of your baselines?
You're a little bit of both. I'll show you.
One X.
The next series of charts is just looking backwards at our comparative data year to year, focusing mainly on staffing and the number of kids that we serve. So these are in your slides. Maybe I'll just go slowly through them. I'm not going to go slowly enough so you can read every line, but they are in here so that you look at it. It does not include what we're proposing. It's just looking at what we do right now and the 3 years prior to now. I mean, just things to highlight in general. You can see which direction our overall special ed, or our overall ADM is going. You can see that our child count is roughly even, a little bit lower this current year. But our percentages stay right around 11% in CSSU, which is a little bit lower than the state average of 14%, under 14. I will pause on this slide a little bit. Last year, you asked the question whether or not, this goes back to that quote from Nicole Mace, are we serving more complex students? And you can see that it's not significant, but there is now a slow trend in disability categories. So if you look at this line here, students with intensive disabilities, so this is students with multiple disabilities, students with autism, disabilities that tend to cost more money. There is a slight uptick and a slight downtick in mild disabilities, which is more specific learning disabilities, speech and language impairment. I think that is something to continue to keep an eye on. The difference between 21% and 26% isn't huge, but it's a steady increase. And that is sort of the reality of kids in our schools now are different than kids in our schools 10 years ago. So I think that's something to highlight. And again, the next series of slides is just looking at individual school comparative data, looking backward. Interesting things, I'll just pull out a few of them on each of these, but Charlotte, this current year has a significant jump in the number of students eligible for special ed. That's different than the past 3 or 4 years. We don't really know what that's about. We don't know if that's a trend or if that will continue. But that's higher. Charlotte traditionally has the lowest percentage of kids eligible for special ed. And now it's a little higher. Heinsberg has actually the opposite phenomenon, which is interesting, but you can see your child count numbers sort of fluctuate like this. So we don't know that that's significant overall. Shelburne had a sort of a big decrease a couple of years ago, but has been pretty steady since then. I realize that I'm going really fast through this, but it's because you'll have another opportunity to ask questions about it at our next meeting. Okay, Williston too has had a downtick in students eligible for special ed.
Now might be a good time, Megan, to remind everybody it's not how we charge special ed to schools anymore.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Schools pay for your ADM share of the total special ed budget is how costs are allocated. This is just mostly to illustrate what you have, what is actually going on in your school relative to staffing. Okay? So this is just to give you a sense of what last year's service plan looked like. So last year, we were at a total increase of 5.2%, service plan to service plan. About $584,000 in salaries, benefits that there was a significant reduction in tuition last year, primarily due to a lot of capacity building work by CVU to bring students back and serve them here. Transportation was up about that much, and this was our total year-to-year increase. This is the service plan that is in the baseline that you see, and this is as a result of round 1. So that does not factor in the work we've done since then, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. As you can see, we've got salary increases. There's, especially in the paraprofessional realm, there's unbudgeted para hires. There's a significant increase this year in tuition. That's at the K-8 level. We've had at least 4 students who were not anticipated in the service plan last year to need outside placements, who needed outside placements. Transportation is up significantly. This is often tied to outside placements because we also have to get kids to and from those schools. And so the initial special ed budget that you're seeing is at a 7.27% increase. That number is going to get better. And the other piece to remember is that that's the expense side of the special ed budget. That doesn't factor in reimbursement or grant dollars yet.
Megan, can you kind of go into a little detail on what the reimbursement side looks like?
So the easiest, quickest math is to assume about 50% of the special ed dollar is reimbursable, because 50% of every special ed eligible dollar is reimbursable. And then for every student whose costs go above $50,000, they're reimbursable at 50% for the first 50, and then over $50,000, they're reimbursable at 90%. So for this tuition increase, those are generally students who are considered extraordinary cost services, which means if it's a $78,000 tuition cost, $50,000 of that is reimbursable at 50%, and that the remainder is reimbursable at 90%. So, yeah.
I'm sure, obviously every plan's different, but when you sort of had another slide with the categories of sort of moderate to severe, does any of that correlate with that threshold? I mean, would the severe tend towards?
Good question. Typically, yes, the students that trend toward being extraordinary cost students are either students with multiple disabilities or students who are receiving their schooling somewhere else and we're paying tuition. So yes, there's a pretty high correlation, although not much. Okay. So here's the work that we've done since that time. Okay, so this is not in the baseline that you have. This is the work that's been done since then, and these are our proposed changes after coming out of round 2. So one thing that we know, in 2 of our smallest communities, Charlotte and Heinsberg, we have a significant decrease in the number of 3 to 5-year-olds that we are serving. Significant enough to result in a model change. We haven't fully defined what that change will look like at the end, but it is going to result in a decrease of 1 FTE professional and somewhere in the realm of 1.7 paraprofessionals. We are also looking in general across the board at each individual school has taken a look at their comparative data and service delivery model. And so we are proposing somewhere in, again, reminding that this is a moving target, we're still working on this, but an addition across the SU of 1.3 professionals and a reduction of, at this point, about 10.5 paras. So that's a net reduction in cost. The reason for the added professional is because we can't not provide service, we're changing how we provide services. The other thing to remember here is that we're having difficult conversations about cost containment, but we're also moving forward work that's been going on in our system for some time to rely more heavily on professionals to provide our service than on paraprofessionals. That's good work, and this is representative of that work. And yes, we're gaining efficiencies this way, but almost all of your schools at one point or another in the past few years have reduced support staff to add professionals. Yes, it will be difficult for schools to fast forward to those changes, but this is a direction that we want to be in, to be providing more expert services. We have made some tuition adjustments to the tuition line reductions. Right now that sits at about $94,000. That's where the risk management piece of this conversation comes though. This number reduction comes from sitting back down with building-based administrators and them saying, okay, so this student, we budgeted for this student in our service plan. We are not sure if he's gonna come. And in years past, we would have budgeted for that student. So we would be planning for, as if they were here, and then they might not be here. This happens a lot at the high school. We have a lot of students who kind of move in and out of our system. What we're proposing is not accounting for those students. So that does put us at risk of a year from now, the student showing up here. So that's just something to be aware of. And then we're obviously having a lot of conversation about more miscellaneous reductions that maybe individually don't seem like a lot of money, but they add up. So where we are right as of today is an additional reduction of about $543,000, and that brings that 7.2% increase to a 3.4% increase. Yes?
I'm confused about adjustments to tuition line. I'm not sure I understand it. So these are ADMs that you're?
No.
What's
so
the tuition?
Special ed tuition, outplacement, outside placement. Yep.
Okay.
So we plan for students that have been in our system before, and so if a student is really struggling and they are placed by mental health outside of our district.
So it's us paying tuition out.
But no, in this scenario, this student, we are not paying when someone else places them, but we will pay when they come back. And we usually plan as if they're coming back. So we're budgeting as if we're gonna have to pay for them once they come back. This is an example of saying, we're not sure if this student, they're not enrolled right now. We're not gonna plan as if they're coming next year. That's where those reductions
So that's a net? Because if they were outplaced, there would be dollars going out.
No, because if they're outplaced but not placed by us, we don't pay for it. A student at Brattleboro Retreat, for example, we don't pay for the residential part of that. We don't pay for that because we didn't place them
So this
there.
would be the service delivery if they're in-house?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Do we know from prior years what the probability that, let's say, there are 10 students that are out, we're going to get 2 coming in?
Yep.
I mean, has that been?
So it's a little hard to measure as a whole because remember, this is only the second year we've done it as a whole. In past years, a couple of your schools that used to build contingency would consistently use it, but then we had other systems that consistently underspent their service plan. So when we first moved to the budget, to a single budget last year, we essentially tried to say, okay, here's how much contingency, if we just added up everyone's contingency, and we lowered that somewhat. This is essentially just lowering that contingency a little bit more.
So it's not as if there's zero contingency, it's just a smaller.
Right. But just know, I mean, similar to the fact that our FMR right now stands at us overspending the special ed budget, granted, we haven't attached revenue to that, it's early on in the year, but the board just has to be prepared for that possibility.
And given that it's special ed, it's $100,000 over $70 million.
Right. Correct.
Who makes the call to tuition somebody to, say, the Brattleboro Retreat?
So if we are placing a student, it's their IEP team. So we go back to that slide from the beginning about the building-based special ed administrator who is the LEA designee at that meeting, and it's ultimately that team that makes the decision.
I gotta make, excuse me, a comment. I appreciate the fact you're trying to, with that 94,000, that line. I appreciate the fact you're trying to manage the budget. My comment would be is, I think you folks really need to look at that, try to quantify that risk, because I feel as a board member, it's easier to advocate for having that money in than to make it up the next year when it's in.
Yep, no.
Just food for thought.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that,
You're saying, preparing us for if there's bad news, and I appreciate that a lot, but if that bad news comes and it comes hard, we're really gonna be sort of in 100,000 of 9 million, but.
Yeah, Bill, the best way I could relate it to experiences you're all used to is when you were each independent schools and we weren't pooled at all. And those of you who were on the board then, you know how every September we'd either have good news or bad news, and it'd be big good news and big bad news because a small number of children changed location or changed service model. When you pooled when we put everybody together, you had a little bit of opportunity to kind of play off if things weren't looking good in one community of our group, maybe it'd be offset with good news in the other. What we're telling you is it's more likely we're going to start beginning every year with kind of the challenge we began this year with, where collectively we're in a little bit of trouble because of what happened when we opened school. And we've had this conversation at length 3 times around, and we believe we're making a good recommendation to you given the context you all have. But we didn't want to be, we wanted to be very clear on kind of the nature of our discussion.
So I just did some quick math, and I note here the 10.5 FTE paraprofessionals that would be going away.
yep.
Like, the denominator on that is like about 45 to 50 paras in the district. Is that
Total?
Yeah.
I could go back.
I mean, I just went through quickly, added the number of special ed FTEs in that.
In this chart?
Like, is it everybody under professionals?
This is how many paras, special ed paras we have this year,
Oh, I added the wrong
117.
number. Good, I'm glad I asked.
Because it'd be great if we had, but no, yeah.
Megan, I'm gonna channel Joan Lennis, who's not here today, but, we've been focusing a lot on finances, but kind of like you to wrap this up with, we've always prided ourselves on
Yes.
taking care of our fragile
Yes.
students, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been a really challenging budget season. I won't pretend that it hasn't been. But I do go back to this piece here. We have spent the past, as many years as I've been here, and certainly before then, really looking at what is a better way to provide services for our kids. And we have a lot of information at our fingertips to help push us to be able to do this better. And yes, there's an assumption of risk about unpredictable kids, kids moving in and out. There is that piece. But I also think that what we're doing, what this process has forced us to do, is fast forward conversations about changing a model to be more effective. And I really believe that. I think the folks that are been working equally hard to scrub this budget really do believe that. We do provide good services. We frequently, I'm sure people say it to you, but people do move in with students with disabilities because they want to access our services, and that's not something that we want to impact simply because we have a challenging budget year. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure maybe Joan could say that more articulately, but I really do believe that. I think that we are having good conversations. Your local administrations are having really good conversations about how do we take this and use it as an opportunity. So. And that was it.
Carter or anybody else who's with you want to chime in or have something you'd like to add?
I think Megan did a nice job. Specifically, but I think we handled it very well.
She's excellent.
All right.
Thank you. Good work.
Thank you, Megan. Important work. So with that, I think explain to the audience is that any board member, CSSU board member is going to go, we're going to go into executive session in the room next door. all board members are invited, but if you're not a board member, we can't invite you, so you'll have to wait here. Can I have a motion to go into executive session for negotiations personnel? So moved. Thank you, Kathy. Second?
Second.
All in favor?